So as it stands right now, as I'm recording this review, Paddington 2 is the best reviewed movie in the history of Rotten Tomatoes, defeating Toy Story 2. So when I saw that this movie was getting a lot of love, 100%, I said, hey, let me check out this film. Because you know what? Paddington 1, that came out about 3 or so years ago, 2014, I liked that movie. And I grew up, well, I can't say I grew up, but when I was a little kid, I was a fan of Paddington. I read Paddington. I saw the stop motion like cartoon book series they had. It was sort of interesting because they had an animated series, but before that, way before that, there was this British sort of halfway stop motion, halfway animated, but they were mostly stills with a narrator going over it, like series of Paddington. This was a long time ago, so many of y'all probably don't even know what I'm talking about. Some of the older people watching this remember. And I always liked Paddington. And when you watch Paddington 1 is a really well-made movie with dazzling visuals, a really great story, great characters, and a really positive and strong message. And I feel like Paddington 2 is even better than Paddington 1. And you have to remember that Paddington Bear is a story, Michael Bond's original Paddington Bear is a story that's meant for children, and the character is very kid-friendly, but it's a good movie no matter what. And I don't like when certain people say, well, it's just a kid's movie, when we've seen, even with the aforementioned Toy Story 2, that kids' movies can be appealing to adults, especially when they have the right messages. And I feel like Paddington 1 and especially Paddington 2 really, really deliver strong messages and ones that kind of hit me right here in the feels. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about here in just a moment. But the film is directed and written by Paul King, who also wrote the first Paddington. And the first Paddington movie had a lot of gags from the original sort of stories. The older stories, they would kind of modernize the gags. But this story is sort of going in its own direction here. And I like how they did it because it still felt like a Paddington story stretched out into like a 2 hour or so movie, but not long-winded. It wasn't boring in any moment. I enjoyed this movie from start to finish. The original cast is back. Ben Whishaw voices Paddington Brown. Hugh Bonneville, Sally Hawkins, that's right folks, the same Sally Hawkins from Shape of Water, reprises her role as Mary Brown, but this movie introduces some new characters that I think are phenomenal for this story. The first one, of course, is Knuckles McGinty, the prison cook, played by Brendan Gleeson. As I'm watching the movie, I'm like, wait a minute, Brendan Gleeson? That's Domhnall Gleeson's dad. That's Mad-Eye Moody from Harry Potter. He's a very great character actor, and I recognize him in this movie, but the one that really takes the cake, and no disrespect to Gleeson at all, is Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant plays Phoenix Buchanan. I really, really enjoyed the character of Phoenix Buchanan. I was reading before I went to go see the movie that when Paul King wrote the script, he created this character specifically for Hugh Grant. And let me tell you something, Hugh Grant really showed what an underrated actor he is. And I know that the real film fans know he's a great actor, but Hugh Grant is unbelievable in this movie. And what's so interesting and so, I guess, somewhat meta is that Hugh Grant plays an actor who had a career at one time, a successful career, but is now doing dog food commercials. And he's having trouble coming to terms with the fact that his career is not where it used to be. But once he meets our buddy Paddington, something that Paddington says triggers him, and that leads into the plot of the movie. Now, the plot of the film is really one that is so fitting with the story of Paddington. You have to understand, Michael Bond wrote so many Paddington stories, back in the day. And what a timely movie to come out. Unfortunately, Michael Bond passed away in June of last year. And before he passed away, and he was 91 years old, so he lived a long life. And before he passed away, this movie was greenlit, and I'm so happy that it came out. And this movie was dedicated to his memory. So the plot of the film picks up a little while after the previous movie, where Paddington kind of gives us an update on the Brown family, and he's kind of become, a real beloved character in the community in London. You know, people really appreciate him, and as the film goes on, you find out just how much they do. So his Aunt Lucy, who still lives in Peru, her birthday's coming up, and Paddington wants to get her something special, so he goes to an antique shop, the one owned by Samuel Gruber, and he finds this pop-up book that is representative of the city of London, and he's saying, okay, well, Aunt Lucy always wanted to see London, and we can't afford to bring her here, so I'm going to buy this pop-up book and send it to her by mail as a birthday present. And this, of course, would lead to Paddington realizing that, you know, things cost money, so Paddington gets a job. And we have some humor early in the movie where he tries to be a barber and that fails, and he tries to wash windows, and it all becomes a lot of visual comedy. And then what ends up happening is once Paddington ends up meeting Hugh Grant's character Phoenix, we then discover that there is a much deeper and darker secret to that pop-up book, and that the pop-up book is indeed a map to some treasure. And then there's a whole backstory about how it happened and whatnot, which I'm not going to go too deep into because it's a bit of a spoiler. But this, of course, would end up leading to, and this is not a plot that's new with films like this. We've seen these kind of plots before where the pop-up book gets stolen and, of course, Paddington gets blamed and goes to jail. And then the entire second act of the film pretty much takes place with Paddington in prison. And it's amazing to see how Paddington Bear can influence even prisoners and cons into being better people. Of course, it's not too realistic because prison in this movie is not portrayed anywhere close to how prison really is. It is a kid's movie, but you can forgive it because the world of Paddington, where walking and talking bears are just accepted and nobody bats an eye, it's a fantasy world, but it's a good fantasy world, and it's one of those escapist type of movies where it works for children, but it also works for adults, because the character of Paddington and the world that he lives in, you know, there are still bad people, there are still selfish people, we see them in this movie, but Paddington's character is one that really makes me warm inside, because it's the way that I feel people should be, and we may never end up being like this, but there are people like this out there. Paddington is such a lovable person because he always sees the good in people. He's very polite. He's very patient. He is a character who's a fish. I mean, there's a lot of fish out of water jokes. There is a fish out of water character in Paddington. But while Paddington is naive to the world, the human world, he maintains his morals and his ethics that his aunt taught him. And Aunt Lucy really, she is in this film. She's in the beginning of the film, and her presence is felt throughout the entire film because the motivation of Paddington is all motivated based on making her happy, because he feels like he's indebted to her for making him the person that he is. And it's one of those things where after watching the film, it really hit me like, if more people on Earth were as patient and as loving as Paddington Bear, and I know he's not real, but it's like, damn, like what a great world it would be. You know what I mean? But it's just not like that. And I really, the movie did kind of inspire me to just be a little bit more patient with people and be a little bit more understanding, because at the end of the day, it's really not going to hurt. And everything ends up not just happy for Paddington, but the ending of this movie has such a happy ending that, like, wow, like, it was a great, great, great ending, and I wanted to see more. Like, I want to see more Paul King Paddington films, more of the old stories brought to life, or even some new stories. But the two best things about the movie, besides just Hugh Grant's incredible performance, Paddington's a great character, but the direction of the movie, Paul King's direction, the visuals in this movie, I can't even describe to you how beautiful this movie looks. This movie has a lot of Wes Anderson-esque directing, meaning that there's incredibly clever editing. There are animated scenes in the film that blend in with the live action. You've got that whole live action CGI thing going like with Space Jam, but in this film, it all blends together so perfectly that it doesn't look like Paddington isn't really there. It feels like he's actually in that space with those actors. And the set pieces all look pretty amazing. The colors, the color palette, just what a great looking movie. And after seeing this movie, I really want Paul King to direct more than just kids movies. I want to see him try other things as well. But it's just a great, I thought it was just a great movie. The movie hits you right in the heart. It's very warm, and you would think that movies that are, comforting and cozy and whatnot could be boring, but this movie's not boring, and you're always rooting for Paddington. He is the ultimate good guy, and he's so lovable that it never becomes one of those, yeah, let's see him get beat up. No, you always want him to succeed because he represents everything that's good about mortals, I guess, about living creatures. I'm not going to say humans because he's not human. Do not sleep on Paddington 2. I don't care if you're 18 or 80. Check out this film. Great movie to take kids to. I know some of you guys have children. This is the movie to take them to. You're not going to get any preaching. You're not going to get any negative messages. You're going to get just a great family fantasy that you will laugh at, your kids will laugh at, and you'll have a great time watching it. I've really loved Paddington 2, dude. I love Paddington Bear. Revisiting his stories from when I was a little kid was awesome as a grown man, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Go see Paddington 2. Just trust me on this one.